It was one of those rare mornings that felt perfect, the kind where everything seemed to fall into place. The sunlight poured gently through my kitchen window, warming the tiles as I sipped my first cup of coffee. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and blooming jasmine from the garden I'd spent months nurturing. My dog was lying lazily near the fence, birds hopping between branches, and I remember thinking how peaceful life could be when left undisturbed. But peace doesn't last long when you live under an HOA's shadow. Just as I was about to sit down with my breakfast, I heard the low rumble of tires on gravel. Slow, deliberate, too close. My heart gave a small jolt. When I looked outside, I saw a white truck with bold black letters across the side. HOA Property Maintenance. Two men in reflective vests stepped out, scanning the area like inspectors on a mission. They didn't knock. They didn't wave. Instead, they walked straight toward my gate, clipboards in hand, eyes fixed on my backyard. For a moment, I thought maybe they had the wrong house. I hadn't filed any complaint, and no inspection was scheduled. But as they unlatched the gate and pushed it open, without so much as a knock or word of warning, my calm morning shattered like glass. My private space, my sanctuary, had just been invaded. I stepped out onto the porch, still clutching my coffee cup, my pulse beginning to race. The two men were already halfway across my yard, taking pictures of my shed, my fence, and even the garden tools leaning against the wall, as if cataloging evidence for a crime I didn't commit. The taller one held a clipboard, scribbling notes. The other pointed a phone camera toward my backyard gate. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "What exactly do you think you're doing on my property?" Neither of them turned around. One simply muttered something under his breath, the kind of dismissive tone that made my stomach twist. I walked closer, my shoes crunching on the gravel. "Hey, you can't just walk in here like that." Finally, the taller man glanced over his shoulder. "Routine HOA inspection," he said flatly, as if that answered everything. No introduction, no explanation, just that cold, bureaucratic phrase. "Routine?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I wasn't notified of any inspection. This is private property. You can't just barge in." He gave a shrug. "We have the right to check for violations," he said, turning back to his clipboard. His partner snapped another photo of my garden hose, like it was some kind of illegal structure. My hands trembled with anger. The fence they'd just walked through had a sign that clearly read, "Private. No trespassing." They ignored it completely. To them, my home wasn't a home. It was just another box on their list. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't routine. This was personal. By the time I reached the edge of my porch, they were already deep into my backyard, stepping over flower beds I'd planted by hand, trampling through the grass like it belonged to them. I could feel my chest tighten with every careless step they took. That garden wasn't just decoration. It was mine. My peace, my work, my boundary. And watching them cross it without permission felt like watching someone walk into your living room and start rummaging through your drawers. "Stop right there," I shouted. My voice cracked through the air, sharper than I intended. The shorter man froze, glancing back nervously, but the one with the clipboard didn't even flinch. He turned to the other and said, "Get a picture of that side wall too. They've extended something here." My jaw clenched. "You're trespassing," I yelled. "This is private property. You need a warrant or my consent to be here." Finally, he looked up, his expression a mix of arrogance and indifference. "Ma'am," he said, "your property is under the HOA's jurisdiction. We have the right to ensure compliance with community guidelines." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jurisdiction? Compliance? Those words sounded official, but what they really meant was control. He was using big words to justify breaking the law and violating my privacy in the process. At that moment, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was entitlement. The HOA believed they could go anywhere, anytime, without question, even into someone's personal sanctuary. And I decided right then, they had just crossed the wrong homeowner. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. The men were still wandering across my backyard, snapping pictures like they were on some secret mission. My first instinct was to call the HOA office, but I didn't want bureaucracy. I wanted answers. So I went straight to the top. I scrolled to the number I'd saved months ago. HOA President Marlene. The same woman who ID sent me half a dozen passive-aggressive emails about the shade of my mailbox. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Good morning," she said, her voice syrupy sweet but cold underneath. "Marlene," I said sharply, "why are there two men from the HOA in my backyard taking pictures without my permission?" There was a pause. Not surprise, not concern. Just silence. Then she sighed, as if I were the inconvenience here. "They're performing an exterior inspection," she said smoothly. "We received a neighbor complaint about possible unapproved modifications." My grip tightened on the phone. An inspection? Without notifying me? Without my consent? That's trespassing, Marlene. She gave a small, dismissive laugh. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's part of our job to ensure the neighborhood maintains its standards." "Standards?" I snapped. "You're standing on my land. You had no right to enter without so much as a knock." Her tone shifted, from patronizing to authoritative. "As HOA president, I have the authority to send inspectors onto any property in the association if we believe there's a violation." For a moment, I was speechless. The arrogance in her voice was unbelievable, as if she thought owning a title gave her power over private rights. "Marlene," I said slowly, my voice low and steady, "you and your team just crossed a legal line. You better tell them to leave my property right now, or I'll be calling the sheriff." There was another pause, this time longer. Then, in a clipped tone, she said, "Do what you think you need to do," and hung up. That was it. No apology, no explanation, just arrogance and dismissal. And that's when I decided, if they wouldn't respect boundaries, I'd make them answer to someone who would. The phone call had ended, but the fury inside me was only beginning. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding, staring at the two men still poking around my backyard as if I didn't even exist. That was the breaking point. I grabbed my phone, switched it to video, and started recording. My voice trembled, not from fear but from the rush of adrenaline. "You're being recorded," I announced loudly. "You are on private property without permission. I've asked your supervisor to remove you, and you refused. State your names for the record." The shorter man froze immediately, glancing at the camera with wide eyes. The one with the clipboard, though, just sighed in irritation. "Ma'am, this isn't necessary," he muttered, waving his hand. "We're just doing our job." "Your job?" I shot back. "Your job doesn't include trespassing on private land. Now leave before I call law enforcement." He straightened up, his fake confidence fading fast. "We have authorization from the HOA board," he said, but his voice cracked halfway through. "We're allowed to inspect exterior structures." I took a step closer, pointing toward the gate. "You see that sign? Private property. No trespassing. It's not decorative. Now, you can either walk out of here or wait for the sheriff to escort you out." That got their attention. They exchanged a look, the kind of silent conversation that says we've gone too far. The shorter one whispered something, and they started backing up toward the gate, mumbling excuses about just following orders. But I didn't stop recording. I followed them all the way to the front yard, capturing every step. My heart was pounding, my voice steady now. "Next time," I said, "you knock. You don't enter someone's home like it's your playground." By the time they got back into their truck, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. But the fear had turned into something else. Strength. For the first time, I realized I wasn't powerless. And as the white HOA truck disappeared down the street, I took a deep breath and dialed the number that would change everything. The Sheriff A.S. Department. The Deputy E.S. cruiser pulled up just 15 minutes later, red and blue lights flashing silently across my driveway. The moment I saw that patrol car, a wave of relief washed over me. Finally, someone with real authority. Someone who could set things right. The officer stepped out, calm, professional, his hand resting on his belt. "Ma'am, you reported a trespassing?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier now. Two HOA representatives entered my property without notice, without permission, and refused to leave until I started recording. He nodded, taking out a notepad. "Do you have proof?" I held up my phone. "Every second of it." As I replayed the footage for him, his expression slowly hardened. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush me, just watched carefully. When the video ended, he looked toward the direction the HOA truck had gone and let out a slow sigh. "You're right," he said firmly. "They had no legal right to enter without your consent. HOA regulations don't override trespassing laws." For the first time all day, I felt vindicated. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't crazy. What they did was illegal. "Would you like me to file an official report?" the deputy asked. "Absolutely," I said, "and I want their names in it." He nodded again, jotting down details. Then he added, "You'd be surprised how often this happens. Some HOA boards think they're above the law, but they're not." That sentence echoed in my head like thunder. They're not above the law. As he left, he handed me a copy of the report number and told me to follow up if the HOA retaliated in any way. I stood there on my front porch, holding that slip of paper like it was a shield. For the first time since this began, I felt protected. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. People like Marlene didn't back down easily, and I could already imagine her next move. The very next morning, an envelope slid under my front door, stamped with the HOA's seal. I didn't even have to open it to know what it was. The same logo that had once meant community now felt like a threat. When I tore it open, my hands trembled with anger. Inside was a neatly printed letter filled with official language and hollow apologies. "We regret any misunderstanding that may have occurred during the recent property inspection," it began. "Our representatives were simply following standard procedure in response to a community complaint." Misunderstanding. That single word set my blood boiling. They hadn't misunderstood anything. They'd ignored every rule of privacy and respect. And now, they were trying to rewrite the story. Halfway down the page, they tried to justify it. As per HOA policy, board members and inspectors may enter exterior property areas when necessary to ensure compliance with neighborhood standards. It was a lie. A carefully worded, manipulative lie meant to make me second-guess myself. But I wasn't the same person I'd been 2 days ago. I had the sheriff's report. I had video evidence. And most importantly, I had confidence now. I called Marlene's office again, my voice sharp with controlled fury. "I got your letter," I said. "You call this a misunderstanding?" She sighed dramatically. "We didn't mean to cause distress," she replied, her tone dripping with false sincerity. "But if you have nothing to hide, I don't see why you're upset." That was it. The classic HOA tactic. Twist the blame, paint the homeowner as the problem. "Oh, I have nothing to hide," I said coldly. "But you have everything to answer for." The sheriff confirmed it. "What your inspectors did was trespassing. And if this letter is your idea of an apology, you're about to regret how you handled this." Her tone faltered for the first time. "Now there's no need to escalate," but I cut her off. "You already did." Then I hung up. For years, the HOA had bullied neighbors with fear. That night, I sat at my dining table with a stack of papers spread out. The HOA's apology, the sheriff's report, and my video evidence paused on my phone screen. I had tried to reason with them, and they had laughed it off. Now, it was time to speak the only language they understood: legal action. I contacted a local attorney the next morning, a no-nonsense man named Harris, who'd handled HOA abuse cases before. After watching my footage and reading the so-called inspection notice, he shook his head in disbelief. "They violated your rights in plain sight," he said. "You don't owe them an explanation, they owe you one." Within a day, my lawyer drafted a letter that hit harder than any argument I could have made myself. It was short, direct, and impossible to ignore. To the board of the Homeowners Association. This letter serves as formal notice that your representatives unlawfully entered private property without the owner's consent. Such action constitutes criminal trespass under state law. Any further unauthorized entry will result in legal proceedings, including claims for damages and harassment. We sent it by certified mail, signature required. I wanted Marlene to have to sign for the proof of her own mistake. 2 days later, I got an email. No letterhead this time, no corporate tone, just a message from Marlene herself. "Let's not escalate this further. We can discuss it at the next board meeting. I'm sure we can come to an understanding." An understanding. The word made me smile. Suddenly, the woman who'd claimed she had authority was trying to sound friendly. That's when I knew. The power had shifted. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a homeowner who stood up. And now the HOA was the one scrambling to clean up the mess they'd made. But I wasn't done yet. If they wanted a meeting, they'd get one, in front of every resident they'd ever intimidated. The night of the HOA meeting, the community hall was packed. I'd never seen so many neighbors show up before. Faces that usually stayed hidden behind curtains were suddenly curious, whispering as I walked in. Word had spread fast. Everyone knew something big was about to happen. At the front of the room sat Marlene, poised behind the long folding table like a queen at her throne. Her usual smug smile flickered the moment she saw me enter, and right behind me, my lawyer, Harris, carrying a neat folder marked Evidence. "Let's begin," Marlene said tightly, tapping her gavel. "Tonight's agenda concerns alleged misunderstandings during a recent property inspection." "Alleged?" I repeated, stepping forward. "You mean the illegal entry onto my private property, the one caught on video?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Marlene shot me a glare. "This isn't the place." "Oh, it's exactly the place," I interrupted. "Every homeowner here deserves to know what their HOA is really doing behind closed doors, or in my case, beyond fences." I set my phone on the table and hit play. The footage lit up the projector screen. 2 men from the HOA walking straight through my gate, ignoring the private property sign, taking photos like they owned the place. Gasps filled the room. One neighbor whispered, "They did that to me too." Marlene's composure cracked. "This is being taken out of context," she began, but my lawyer calmly slid a document across the table. "The sheriff's report," he said, "confirming trespass." The room went silent. Marlene's eyes darted around, searching for support, but the board members looked down at their papers, avoiding her gaze. "Enough of the excuses," I said firmly. "You violated my privacy, lied to cover it up, and tried to bully me with fake authority. I'm not the one who should be explaining myself tonight. You are." The crowd erupted in quiet applause, hesitant at first, then stronger. Neighbors who'd once stayed silent now stood a little taller. Marlene swallowed hard, her voice barely steady. "We'll issue a written apology," she muttered, "and update our inspection policy." "Good," I said, "because if this ever happens again, to anyone here, I T-stop at a letter. I'll take it straight to court." And for the first time, Marlene had nothing to say. The morning after the board meeting felt different, quieter, lighter, almost peaceful again. For the first time in weeks, I stepped into my backyard without feeling watched. The same garden they'd trespassed through now felt like a symbol of victory. My space. My rules. My home. A few days later, I received another envelope from the HOA. this time hand-delivered, not shoved under the door. Inside was a formal written apology signed by every board member, including Marlene. It admitted that the inspection did not follow proper protocol and promised that no representative will enter private property without written consent ever again. It wasn't just an apology. It was a confession. Proof that they knew they were wrong. Soon after, word spread through the neighborhood. Neighbors who'd once stayed silent started speaking up. Stories came out. Quiet whispers of intimidation, petty fines, and unauthorized inspections. But this time, they weren't afraid to fight back. My stand had opened a door they thought was forever locked. As for Marlene, she kept her title but lost her power. The board voted to require homeowner approval for every inspection. The same HOA that once ruled through fear now operated under accountability, because someone finally said no more. I looked around my yard, the same fence, the same flowers, but everything felt new. I realized that fighting back hadn't just protected my land. It had protected my peace, my dignity, and my neighbors' rights too. That's when it hit me. The HOA could own the paperwork, but they'd never own the people. And as the sun set behind that freshly mended fence, I smiled. Because this time, when I closed my gate, it stayed closed.